And I remember meeting my grandmother for the first time. I only had one left, one grandparent, and she taught me a few things. One of them was you always make your bed in the morning, and the second thing was how you treat books. She didn't finish high school, if I understand correctly, and she was from a different generation. But if I ever threw a book on the floor, or if I just threw it on the table, came back from school, she'd say, "That is your teacher. That is precious. The words inside will teach you. You can agree or disagree, but she used to use the word venerable, and I think that's kind of ingrained in me, that a book, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, it holds the hard work of someone else's life story or experiences that can teach you something."
That's Tikiri Herath, up next on the All Things Risk podcast. Welcome back to the All Things Risk podcast. I'm your host, Ben Catania. Who am I? I'm a longtime risk professional and a lifelong student of risk and uncertainty. And this is where I and we get to explore these themes as they relate to just about any topic. And we do this via long-form conversations with fascinating guests who come from all walks of life. And the overall goal for this is to help us get better at embracing uncertainty. Now, before we get into it, a quick reminder that if you are looking to raise your game on decision-making, and decision-making is like a superpower if you know how to do this well, we have a course coming out just for you on this topic. And what's more, one of its modules is available online for free. Just go to all-things-risk.teachable.com to find out more, or check out the link in the show notes. All right, let's get into our latest episode. And this is a conversation that's certainly about uncertainty and decision-making, but it's also about culture, travel, books, writing, justice, and career transitions. And it's also super fun. My guest is Tikiri Herath. Tikiri is an award-winning author who's written 4 fiction and 4 nonfiction books. Her fiction books are part of something that she calls the Red-Heeled Rebel series, and Tikiri's work and her books are reflective of her own very interesting background. She was born in Sri Lanka, but considers herself Zambian, and she's lived in 7 different countries growing up, including Canada as well as apartheid-era South Africa. And throughout her upbringing and her travels, she became very drawn to the way women were treated in the different countries in which she lived. And you'll hear about her own background on that. And even if that isn't a topic that resonates deeply with you, you'll see how Tikiri wove that into her own experience and into her current work. Now, her first career was as a diplomat and a civil servant for the government of Canada. She, in fact, worked in Brussels for the Canadian mission to NATO, amongst other things. And her deep background is part of her writing. So in her fiction books, she won't write about a place unless she's actually visited that place. So she has made a career transition because she started out as this civil servant, but that's not where her true passion was. And you'll hear about how she risk managed her career to do the thing that she does successfully now, to become the author that she is now. And there are so many wonderful lessons in all of that. No matter who you are or what you do, there are themes related to fear, the unknown, decision-making. And you can also check out in the show notes a copy of one of her books that's available for free on this very topic. And we also hear why Tikiri thinks that the concept of saving face in Asian culture, even though she's Asian, is problematic, and also why she thinks we need to discard some of the cultural traditions in many cultures around the world. So I don't want to give too much more away other than to say this is a very fascinating and fun conversation. So let's get into it. Here is Tikiri Herath. Tikiri, welcome to the All Things Risk podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on. I'm quite excited. This is going to be fun.
Thank you, Ben, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So for starters, it would be great. So I hate this question, right? And I ask it of all my guests pretty much, which is when you get asked what it is you do, how do you answer that question?
Right now, I say I'm an author. It's keeps it easy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's cool. And people can get that. But we were just talking just before the show that there are all these wonderful opportunities out there and these careers that never existed before. So it's sometimes difficult to define who you are in such a small soundbite.
Absolutely, and it seems like the de rigueur, the thing to do these days is to come up with 3 funky words like author, speaker, entrepreneur, kind of that people put it next to their name on the LinkedIn profile. Mm-hmm. I've decided just to call myself an author. One reason, Ben, is I find it brings so much credibility. It's of course the work you do, but I'm going to be frank with you. It helps me cross borders. It helps me get so many things done. I live right at the Canadian-U.S. border. My entry to the U.S. is, if not a breeze, they treat me like a celebrity.
Really?
So, yeah, it is so funny how it changed when I used to work for the federal government as a public servant with a top secret clearance, diplomatic pass, the official passport. I had everything, and I've never been treated as just a citizen who walks in by myself and just calls myself an author, and I get the white glove treatment. Mm-hmm.
Is that just because people ask you, oh, what is it that you've written and that kind of thing, or what's behind that?
I think there's that human nature of curiosity. So, border guards are humans too, so they get curious, but I also think there's a bit of I don't know what it is, but I'm just learning this, and maybe I write nonfiction as well as fiction, but. Yesterday, I had somebody up in the roof making a lot of noise while I was working. I went upstairs and I asked him how long will he be doing whatever he was doing, and so I said I do work from home, and he gave me a quizzical look, and I said I write. I'm a writer, and he put out his hand and he said, "Madam," and kissed my hand.
Wow.
And I'm sitting there. How did that happen? And of course, he said, I am a refugee from Yugoslavia. I came to Canada a long time ago, and I was a poet back home. And so he told me his story. So you meet some really interesting people, and I think you get to touch human to human when you say you're a writer, because, again, I don't know how to explain it, but I'm just realizing it's like a little golden key, and I'm going to keep it as long as I can.
Yeah, what a lovely story. Great. Well, let's delve into your background a little bit, because I think you have an interesting background, and you've got one of those accents that sometimes is difficult to place, because presumably you have lived in, is it 7 different countries, and you moved around, and it'd be great to delve into that a little bit. What was it like growing up?
Sure. I was born in Sri Lanka. It's a little island in the Indian Ocean, but left when I was a tiny baby, so I don't really remember much. But my family was working for mining companies. There were expatriates in the mining field, engineers and teachers. So they moved to Tanzania. I think it was Dar es Salaam. We went to Nairobi, Kalilushi, Lusaka in Zambia. So we moved around a lot. But I grew up most of my teenage years was in Africa, and I consider myself to be Zambian, though the Zambians say you're not Zambian. I like to think I'm Sri Lankan, but Sri Lankans go, you're not Sri Lankan. And then we immigrated to Canada. I think we had a choice of a few countries, but given the mining background of my parents. But I think, so as soon as we came to Canada, I realized, when you travel so much, and as a teen, as a young adult, you're trying to figure out your identity. And given the fact that when you move around so much, you're exposed to so many cultures, which was amazing when I look back at it now. But then I was just as confused as any other teenager or any other young adult. And as soon as we got to Canada, I said, to heck with this. I'm going back to Asia to discover my Asian roots. And I took off to Thailand for a year. I love the country, but I hated my experience. Because it made me realize I'm not Asian. I don't have that. There's a very different. There's certain cultural traits. And again, I'm broad brushing Asia, of course, that I've seen in the culture that I was born in, as well as in that subcontinent, that I don't much care for. And I believe there's certain things that must be left behind, and I'm not afraid to speak to that. My books are based on cultural traditions that I think we need to leave behind and move ahead to the 21st century. But so I lived there for a year, came back, and then just moved on. When you travel a lot, you tend to you get the 7-year itch, I guess. So I've lived and worked in Europe, in Belgium, Brussels, the Netherlands. I worked for NATO at one point, and in Canada, in the States. So I've been a little bit all over the place. And I think this is one reason I write my books, because I wanted to find an outlet to share those experiences that I've seen, and in one way to make sense of what I've experienced throughout my life, and in another way to share with the world what I feel about those experiences.
Let's delve into some of that a little bit. You talk about tradition. So what was it that you were doing in Thailand? Were you just traveling, or what were you doing in Thailand? Mm-hmm.
I actually I took an international exchange program. I was in university, and they were offering a few places you can go to. So it's through that program that I said, that's it, I'm leaving Canada. I might not come back, but I did have that safety net because it was part of a university program. But it was only a 3-month program. And when they said, when they asked all the students to come back, I decided to stay. I found myself a job from a small news company that turned out to very soon after got bought out by Reuters International. So I got exposed to the world of writing and news stories. It was business news. So that was a very interesting experience, and partly maybe what got me into writing to some extent.
You were a very prominent reader, though. Is that right? When you were growing up, you read a lot of books. How did you? Yeah.
Absolutely. And Ben, you've traveled a lot, but when you travel as a child, it's very hard to make friends because you're always moving, right? You go to a new place, you're the odd one out, you're the stranger. I'm a stranger everywhere. And I think one of the benefits of that is the friends that I had were my books. I started off with, I grew up with the Enid Blytons of the world and Nancy Drews, and I'd be the one reading books with a torchlight under my bed, my sheet, even though I was supposed to be asleep. And they were my friends. They kept me, they entertained me, they made me laugh and cry, and took me on adventures that, and I felt like they were also my mentors, my teachers, and also in the same vein, I should say, even though I was lucky enough to have traveled and had a roof over my head and food on the table, my family life inside the home was not the most pleasant experience. It was quite toxic, and coming from that background, you just want to crawl into a little corner and ball yourself up as small as you can to keep that toxicity away from you. And it wasn't very pleasant at all, and one reason why I just got the heck out of home as soon as I could. But books were my escape from that the nastiness that I saw every day. So reading books, I felt they were my parents. Books were my teachers. Books were my mentors. Books were my. I think I not just found escape from them, but I also learned a lot of lessons. Because I didn't have the teachers and the parents around me to do that for me.
Right.
That makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and it was actually, it sounds quite fortunate that you had access to those to those things to be able to read those books. Did you have a favorite? You mentioned Nancy Drew, but did you have some favorite books, all-time favorites, growing up?
I used to read. Who wrote The Lost World? Why can't I think of his name? He wrote the book that was turned into the dinosaur movie, Arthur Conan Doyle. I think those marvelous adventures where he would just go all over the world, not him, the protagonist, and would stand on the tip of I don't know, a peak or a cliff and look out into the wilderness and see, I don't know, mountains in South America or the jungles of somewhere, and I'd just get immersed in those travel adventures. I love them, but there were few books that really, I don't call them my favorites, but looking back, if I didn't read those books, they wouldn't have shaped the world that I live in my head. And those were books that talked about, either directly or indirectly, the idea of social justice. And I think I write on my website about finding a dusty, ripped copy of the Gulag Archipelago, which is a really hard book for an 8-year-old girl to read, let alone even now. I tried reading it again, and after the first few chapters, your stomach turns when you realize how humans can treat other humans. But it taught me about the value of just that word justice. It's so important to me, to the point, and when I saw bad things happening inside the home, I would be the one, I can't keep quiet. I'm the one who'd stand up. If I see bad things happening in front of me, I don't care what would befall me, I would stand up and speak out, because it's just the way I am. But I think that came from reading those books and seeing those protagonists standing up. Whether they were in concentration camps or whether they were in Stalin's labor camps, reading them as a child made me go, wait a minute, that is wrong, and I'm going to say something about it, even though it might mean greater punishment. Yet I can look in the mirror, while everyone else would turn around or look away and go, no, little girls should be quiet and keep quiet, and you don't speak up and you don't say anything disrespectful. But I think they taught me to speak. I don't think I answered your question, Ben.
No, that's and by the way, I love it. I love these kinds of responses. So just that's great. Sometimes we discover things. The conversation kind of meanders, and we end up in a place that we didn't know how we got there. But those are some of the most wonderful parts of some of the conversations I've had. So this is all great. I was trying to find out, because I just recall one of my friends who's was also a writer, and he teaches writing, and one of the prominent things that he comes up against is people that want to learn to become a writer, and he'll say, well, what do you read? And then people say, oh, I don't read, I don't read that much, but I want to write. Well, and he says, well, you can't really be a great writer unless you read,
Right, so, that's the first requirement, right?
Because I suppose you need to know writing style, you need to know about story arcs, you just need to enjoy it and revel in it, I suppose.
Right. It's like a baker saying, I hate cake, but it just,
I want to be a baker.
I guess it just doesn't make sense.
Yes.
If you don't like it, then you're forcing yourself, and you're doing it for reasons that aren't that aren't true to you. I love my books. I love reading. I don't just love them. I treasure them. And one of the things I did learn, we went back to Sri Lanka for a very short time. And I remember meeting my grandmother for the first time. I only had one left, one grandparent, and she taught me a few things. One of them was you always make your bed in the morning, and the second thing was how you treat books. She didn't finish high school, if I understand correctly, and she was from a different generation. But if I ever threw a book on the floor, or if I just threw it on the table, came back from school, she'd say, that is your teacher. That is precious. The words inside will teach you. You can agree or disagree, but she used to use the word venerable, and I think that's kind of ingrained in me, that a book, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, it holds the hard work of someone else's life story or experiences that can teach you something, right? And I don't remember who said it, but maybe it was one of the gurus, Brendan Bouchard or Ed Milet, or someone said that when you read a book, you get, within 4 hours, you get 20 years worth of lessons, life lessons, which is so true. And I think for that reason, books are, for me, they're treasures, and in whatever form they come in, audio, ebook, that's just technical, that's just the vehicle in which the information comes in, right? But of course, paperbacks are always special.
Yeah, there's something about having a physical book in your hand. I've started to buy books. I was sort of Kindle only for a long time, and I've started to physically buy books again.
Right.
And I just love having one in my hand. And there's something about it, and just turning the pages, and even smelling it, and those kinds of things. Something wonderful about that.
That's so true.
Yeah, I'd like to. I'd like to try to understand. You talked about this whole social justice thing, and a lot of your work is about, the characters are women. I think your audience is predominantly women, if I'm not mistaken. What is it? And you talked a little bit about this, about culture and how you saw women treated. Could you explain a little bit some of those things, some of the examples of things that you saw that you then started to incorporate in your books? And I think that would be really interesting to delve into a little bit.
Absolutely. I thought most of my audience would be women, and the majority are women. But what's interesting, and I just want to answer that before we go into the stories. What's interesting is there are a lot of men who are also interested in my book, and the men who are interested in my stories are usually ex-military. They are former police officers. And the reason is, once I got to know them, they tell me stories like this. I was sent to Afghanistan or wherever in the world. I saw this and this and this happen, but I did not have a mandate, nor the authority, I couldn't do anything about it. So when I read your stories, I get a little, it's not cathartic, but somebody's telling the story the way I saw it. So thank you for sharing it, because I could never not only talk about it, but I couldn't even have done anything. And it was right in front of me. And yet I'm the one with the machine gun or the power. And I couldn't do anything to save the most vulnerable person in that village or in that place. So I find that really interesting, and these are, hardcore the retired service people from Texas who have ranches there right to me, and quite different from my background, but I'm establishing friendships with my readers from all sorts of backgrounds.
That's fascinating. And I suppose I can understand that at a level. Because if you're someone who's a serviceman, and maybe they've have a bit of PTSD, or maybe they've seen some dark stuff that most of us, 99.9% of us in the Western world, haven't seen, and it's hard to process that. So I can understand. Could we talk a little bit about some of the themes and some of the stories? I mean, you've written, is it 4 books now? 4 fiction books. I know you've got some nonfiction too. Could you talk about this? Is it the Red-Heeled Rebel series that is the fiction? Could you talk a little bit about what the sort of the setting and the characters and some of the themes and things? That would be fascinating. Absolutely.
So growing up, what I saw in every country that I went to, and it's only as an adult that I came to the free and open Western societies, but I went to British schools, so I got this little bubble of Western education, but I lived in an Eastern home, but my environment was from Africa or somewhere else. So I just realized, though, everywhere I went, women were treated differently, and especially in very traditional cultures. And as a girl, if you told me, Tikiri, you're going to eat second because you're a woman, or you're going to go out through the back door because you're a woman, or you're going to, it really bothers me, because And this is as a young girl. I grew up living right next to South Africa, which was under the apartheid regime at that time. Mandela was in prison, and I had friends in my class who were ANC. They were, I don't know if they're not refugees as much as they were exiled themselves.
Like dissidents.
Right, dissidents, and the kids would come to my school. So I would sit next to girls and boys whose parents were either shot dead in front of the parliament just for asking to vote. So till this day, I will vote. You'll have to shoot me 10 million times before I get to the voting booth. It's so important to me because of what I saw. Why am I telling you this? Is to show that that all these different places where I went to, women though were always secondary, and then I always compare that, what seems in some traditional cultures to be almost accepted. It is the way it's always being done. And I'll tell you a few specific examples, but in general, when you look at how women are considered second class in all the different ways, and then I turn around and people go, ooh, apartheid is a terrible thing and we need to stop it. And then we did stop it. And we cannot, racism is bad. We've all agreed to that. I'm not saying it's eradicated. We do have issues and there's still lots of work to be done. But there's common agreement. And I'm going to say something very controversial now. People are very quick to put the race card on the table. Yet when it comes to gender, we excuse it. We let it happen in the name of culture and tradition. And that, Ben, is when my blood boils, because whether you tell me as a human being to go to the back of the bus because I'm a girl or because of the color of my skin, the way I feel will be the same. You'll make me feel as that horrible feeling of not being up to snuff, not to being your equal. I don't care for what reason you tell me to go to the back of the bus, but that makes me feel bad. And I'll give you one example. I hope your audience isn't too squeamish, but when a girl gets a period in most Asian countries, and this is prevalent, I think mostly in the subcontinent of Asia, in Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, and I was subject to this. They send you away for 7 days to a dark room, and you're not allowed to see anybody.
What?
I was 9 years old, and here I've been reading and I've been traveling, and this is when I went back to Sri Lanka, and here I am, I like you, I sponge information, and I'm learning about the world, and all of a sudden my life changed because biologically I was growing, I was changing, and that's just a normal part of human. That's just part of being a human, being a female. And all of a sudden, I was banished to a small dark room in a little shed, and I was told I cannot see anybody, I cannot talk. I was given a little broth every day because that's what tradition says that you have to eat. And when I asked, of course, me being me, I fought back and I said, why can't I get out there? What's wrong with me? And all of a sudden I was told, you are no longer a girl, you're a woman, and that idea of your second class, you're no longer can run around and play with everybody. You have certain restrictions now. And the reason I was given for not being able to get out, and for 7 days that I was stuck in a dark room without being able to see or talk to anybody, except for that my aunt would come and throw the bowl of soup and walk away quickly as if I was a leper. The reason they said was because I would, if I got out in that position as getting your first period, that if a man saw me, that I would curse them. This is coming from both my parents had university degrees. One of them had a master's from the UK, and yet they had such a hard time shedding these backward, regressive, harmful traditions. And I was sitting there having done all the reading, and as my brain was and I could argue, right? And I did argue, which meant greater punishment. But so that's just one example of does that make any logical, rational sense? And even from a health perspective, that's the worst thing you can do. That's exactly the time when you need to feed the girl you need iron, you need a whole, whack of good health diet, not a little broth. And mentally, it puts you in a place. It's a way of telling a young woman that you're a woman now, so shut up, sit down, sit back, and you're no longer allowed to climb trees and be that bodacious person that you know, as children we run around, we play. And it's a nice way to shut the little girl up and groom them for that second state in society. And I compare that all the time with the apartheid regime. The blacks had to go in the back door. And I remember going to a temple. This was a few months later, and I was told, one of my female relatives turned around and said, well, you aren't allowed in. And I said, why not? I said, well, you've got your period today, so you can't come in because you'll dishonor the temple. So we're all going in. You just hang out there. And of course, that's what the women did. So I sat in this outside this temple. I looked in, and it was a Buddhist temple of all things. And the irony of a religion that talks about compassion and you know, goodness to all, and how they would treat a young girl as a piece of discarded meat. If I sound angry, I am, because I think that is wrong. And I'm not angry for myself anymore, but I'm angry that it happens to other girls still today in 2019. And Elon Musk talks about sending us to the Mars, and we've got driverless cars, and you and I are communicating through the internet over 2 continents, and yet these barbaric backward traditions exist. And what bothers me even more is I was with parents who were educated to some degree, but they had such a hard time shedding those backward traditions. And it really harms a person. And that's just one example, and I could give you many. I mean, I've met girls who've and I was lucky, I'm not one of them, but many girls who've I was lucky I wasn't married off, right? At 12, it happened. Jeez. I was lucky I wasn't physically or in any other way abused, which happens often in those societies because girls are just a second, you know, that's one of the things I learned about reading the Gulag Archipelago, Man's Search for Meaning, and all those tremendous books that talk about how human beings treat other human beings in the vilest of circumstances is when you want to when you want to tell an entire group of people or a section of people that if you want to mistreat them or keep them down, you start with these small little things, right? You start saying like what Hitler did in Germany was a wonderful example. He was an amazing orator. He was a wonderful manipulator. I'm using the word wonderful as in he was very good
skilled at it. Sure.
Right, very skilled at it. And so I see in the big macroeconomic political scale, how these happen with groups of people. And then I see that replayed in the home front, in the school front, when it comes to girls. But that seems to be okay, Ben. I'm sorry, I'm going on a rant
all right.
here.
That's all right.
I'm going to stop right there because I think I've
lots of thoughts and reactions, and it is amazing. On the one hand, we've got all this technology, and yet hundreds of millions of young women around the world go through those kinds of experiences. It's incredibly ironic and tragic, and it's hard to figure out what do we do about this, because part of it seems to me like that some of this is about power, and it's about also dehumanizing people, because it's easier to control people if you make them less human or less than human. It's just a classic. It's just classic. Whether or not we're talking about the genocides in Rwanda, where the different tribes were called cockroaches and things like this.
Yes.
It's I'm not saying that's exactly what's going on, but there's a dehumanizing that goes on.
Yes, exactly.
And that's highly problematic. And also, you had access to the book, so when this is happening to you, you're like, well, wait a minute, this isn't. How can this happen? There's another way. There are other ways. So but most people don't. in those
Yes.
circumstances. So they don't have those reference points. Many women are, they don't go to school after a certain time, so they don't have the ability to read and write the way that you do, and the tools that you have. And yeah, you're right that certain traditions. Well, why do we hang on to them? Why not get rid of them?
Right.
And I do find sometimes those things are. And sorry, I'm going off on a little bit of
No. Please do.
But I think it's I've traveled a
conversation.
lot, and I sometimes see these sort of practices or these beliefs or these things that they don't make sense. And you just and I've seen for example, I've done some work in Africa,
Right.
and there's some things, wonderful things about Africa, and I'm not singling out Africa because this also happens in many parts of the world, where you go into a village and actually things work really well. Because everyone knows everyone. Well, not really well, but I mean, there are some communal ways of doing things that, for example, someone told me as a Nigerian guy, I was doing some work in Nigeria. If you go into a Nigerian village, someone so much as steals a pig in a village, like that's a death sentence. But you could become the head of state and pilfer billions of dollars, and that's kind of okay.
Right.
And partly some of those in those big urban settings, whether we're whether or not we're talking about Lagos or we're talking about Bangkok or Manila or Colombo or whatever, that all of it's no longer that setting is different, and all kinds of things break down. So sorry, I'm going on a little bit of rant as well, but
no, it's a good point. But maybe it's not just a breakdown. Maybe it's a amplification of what we didn't.
Possibly.
And we all like to. There's one Asian trait, and I'm Asian, so I'm going to say I can say it. And if somebody has a problem with it, we can have a conversation. That Asian trait of it's a repugnant trait of saving face, and it's what's happening in Hong Kong right now. And actually in Asia we talk about it outright. And I remember the chairperson in Hong Kong. I'm not sure, but the president, but it's a different word.
Carrie Lam.
I believe so. And she herself said, I do not want to lose face. And yet, because she didn't want to go back on a decision that she made, an agreement that she made with the Chinese, and hence people are now on the streets and are being subjugated to some violence. When you really think about it, that Asian trait of saving face, I think, you read all these books about Asia is the next big thing, we're going to go up. And I think as long as you don't treat 50% of your population with respect, the respect that they deserve as just human beings, you're in trouble. And the second thing is, as long as you worry about saving face versus opening the door and actually trying to figure out what are the issues and then fixing them so that you can move forward, you're going to be held back.
Sure.
So whatever momentum that Asia stands up and goes, we're the next big superpower, and I'm totally broad brushing because Asia is anything from Sri Lanka to China. But that trait I see over and over again, to the point, and I don't know, Ben, if you've got, I went to business school twice. I have an MBA from Brussels, and having done part of my exchange in Thailand, the idea of when you do business in Asia, you have to remember this trait. So it's not something that people are hiding about. We talk about it openly, even to the point they teach it in business school, and to the point that Hong Kong, the political leaders are talking about it to justify their actions. I think that is such a huge problem that we need to get rid of, just like the traditions. So one of the reasons these traditions exist, especially in the Western world, is because somebody they intertwine their culture and their race with their identity so much that all of a sudden, even though they don't agree with something, it's an offense to say anything against that whatever trait that you're talking about. One good example is if I tell somebody in the mosques. Let's talk about the mosques. In Ontario, in Canada, there was a journalist went out there to do some other research, but it was a woman, and she found out that she couldn't walk into the mosque in the front door like the men did, and she was asked to go to the back door while her camera man who was allowed to go in the front door, and the reason was because she's a woman. Now, as I mentioned earlier, what's the difference between that and what the black entrance in South Africa in the apartheid regime? This happens in Canada. And yet when you talk about that, and when she did talk about it, she wrote about it, the insults lobbied at her was that you're a racist, you can't say those things. And I'm perplexed, I'm astounded, and I am baffle-gobbed at the stupidity of that kind of that reaction, Ben. If it's wrong, you do not treat another human being as a second class. And as soon as somebody talks about it, the offense is so great because the identity is so wrapped up in that backward, cultural, regressive. And don't tell me that sending a woman to the back door is not regressive. Then that's a whole other conversation, because that kind of activity belongs in the 15th century, not in the 21st century. Just like you don't want to tell me to sit like Rosa Parks was told to sit in the back of the bus, and we all agree with wise nods in our face, right? Saying, oh my goodness, absolutely, that was wrong. Rosa Parks is a hero. And yet, if you talk, there are women who are told to go to the back of the door today. So I totally went in a different tangent, but I think I'm in agreement with you. In violent agreement.
Yeah, it's hard, right? It's difficult to have these conversations honestly and openly, and the identity, tribalism, culture. It's cultures, change and shift, and the things that
exactly.
That's the human. That's the course of human history. Things change. Some things that are sort of culture. Well, there was maybe when the practice started, there was a practical reason for it, but that no longer, we don't have that reason anymore. So why do we have to hold on to something if it doesn't make a lot of sense, or it's wrong, or just morally wrong? It's
harmful,
or harmful to people. Right. Yeah, it is interesting. At the same time, we're going through this period where, globalization is a bad word, but I do think we need more of the kind of experiences that you have with different cultures, and living and working around the world. It's a little bit more. It's not really globalization, but it's more genuine. Genuine experiences that are across different countries and cultures. Sometimes being in that being the outsider is really helpful and gives you a very interesting perspective, which probably, just getting back to your writing, probably comes through in some of the stories that you write. Could we just maybe talk just that sort of that kind of the plot setting for the book, the first book anyway, about you talk about it's a young girl in a foreign land, which I'm sure relates very well to you. So I guess that's how you came up with the idea for the stories. How much of it is based on your experiences? How much of it is is fiction? Where do you
imagination?
Yeah.
I think the big themes, of how women are treated, the big, the settings, they're all from my experiences. And I told myself in my first series, so I have my short story and my 3 novels, all of them will only go to countries where either I have lived or I have visited for more than a week. So I got a little flavor of the culture, or I know it well enough. So I have to have had my feet on that country. Otherwise, I wouldn't put it into my book. So I cover, I think, 4 continents, and I don't remember how many countries, but across the 4 books, I have a young girl who's half Sri Lankan, half Indian. She loses her parents to a fiery crash, and I'm not giving too much away, but there's, when you write a story, there's part of the writing process is to build intrigue, to leave a lot of questions in the reader's head, and also to take them very, very fast, adventurous ride, because a lot of people read books for entertainment. So you have to take what you've learned. I mean, I found I have to take what I've learned, what I've saw growing up, my own experience, but put it couch it into a story that will keep a reader interested and is worth their time, right? And so there's a lot of things. I do touch on human trafficking, modern day slavery. I touch on honor killings. I touch on female genital mutilation, and also child brides. That's the first book, is this young girl who's now all of a sudden an orphan. She's sent off to India to a grandmother who she didn't even know existed, and who is very traditional and who can't see past her nose, except she has this young girl now to feed. And a lot of women, as you know, in India has a huge crisis of where they abort the female fetuses, that there's now more women and men. So she sees, because she's a girl, she's a burden, so she marries her off for money. So I touch on all these major topics. Now, I have never walked into a brothel, or I have never been forcefully married. I'm very fortunate that I've lived a privileged life in that regard, but I have seen that, I have heard, and I've had friends, Ben, who told me that, yes, I was married at 12 and I was beaten, and this is what I was the fourth wife. I was a young girl they brought in as a fourth wife. It was horrible. I got away. I heard, I was subject to female genital mutilation, and I don't want anyone to ever go through that horror, because that's by the way, female genital mutilation, for those of you know, it's not something as simple as just a snip. It's the whole reason for it is to keep a woman's sexuality down. So I mean, the basis of these are really horrific. And again, I just compare that to what happened in apartheid South Africa, and I go, world, what's the difference, please? Can you tell me? What's the difference between treating a woman, because I can be both. I can be both colored. When I grew up, I was called a colored girl, because if you're when you're brownish, you're colored, right? So I would have to go through the colored line in South Africa, and I lived at the border, so it wasn't too far from me. I lived with friends who had to go to the back door to get their bread, rations. So all to say is sorry, I'm going off topic again, but in my books I take that girl from that orphan stage and how she's subject to all these different cultural traditions that are harmful to girls that happen today, and I take her through, but I make her stronger and stronger, and right. She fights back, she speaks up, and she also gains friendship among a ragtag bunch of young girls and young men who are also lost and alone, and who've been subject to whatever it is. Like I have Tatiana from the Ukraine, who was sold. There's the white slavery is an issue in Eastern Europe, so I brought her in. I've got little Win from Laos, who was trafficked from Laos to. This is happening in the Burmese, Laotian neighborhoods where the Chinese come in, take those young girls, stick them into containers, and take them around the world and sold off. So I've got her, a little 15-year-old girl, and I've got Katie, a girl in Canada who's abused as a child, fostered in different homes. I have girlfriends who abused at home, and then they had to go through foster homes, and it gets worse, right? So I bring all these people who I've met in my life, and they become my characters, and but I make them spunky, I make them strong, and there's young men as well who go through again adversity as young boys, and then how do you tackle the issues that you go through, but not sit there and dwell on it, but to stand up and say, I'm going to make my life, I'm going to do something different. Like little Win, the girl who's trafficked from Laos by the Chinese, she becomes a computer wizard because she is forced by the brothel owners to fix the computer or do all the little computer gadgets. He doesn't want to deal with it, so he goes, okay, little girl, you take care of that part, and she teaches herself everything to the point that she can hack her way into anything, and I use her. So that's just little skills that I put into these people's hands, these young people's hands, and I'm hoping that someone somewhere, little girl or little boy, will read that and go, yes, it's dire for me now, I don't see a way out, but look at these people who've gone through far worse than I have, or maybe the same, and they're strong. They don't succumb to their situations, and so I moved along. And by the last novel, they've got CIA guns in their hands, and you have to read the series.
Right. Sounds cool.
But
these are stories of hope. That's
yes.
Yeah. And I was just going to mention the importance of that, because as you talk about some of these themes, human trafficking and female genital mutilation and things like this, like part of me just starts to think, oh God, this is going to be sad. Like I can't, no, life is hard enough. I don't want to do it. But when the way that because actually one of my favorite books was, have you read A Fine Balance?
I have a long time ago, by
Written Mystery, I think.
Mystery, yes.
That
was a hard book to read.
Beautifully written book, but sad as anything. And and it was because of all these themes, right? And when we think about the what's going on in the world with some of the things that you talk about in the themes in your book, it is easy to to kind of to lose some hope. But when you start to flip that and say, right, so if the story of the woman in the the computer wizard, the thing that I'm taking away is, well, what do I have access to? What's in front of me? What are the resources that I have access to that I can use, right? And I think some of these things start to those are great vehicles to build some hope, but also to latch on to some learning. And similarly, I think in some of the themes in your book, they probably resonate well with the audiences that are completely different, which is just in our everyday lives, we're all going through some problems, but it's some of the same themes apply. So what do I have access to, right? And what can I do? What are the things that are in my control? And all of those themes are they're kind of they're some of these things are quite universal, aren't they?
Absolutely. I should say, Ben, though, that even though in our conversation we're delving into the why I wrote these books, I am not doing a marketing talk right now.
No.
I am just giving you all the background of it. But when I talk about the books, they're fast, they're furious, they're a beach read, and they take these girls who are in adversity all the way to the strong, spunky, sassy, kick-ass, badass heroines who will shoot the villains in the balls if they have to, and they do. And they will make the bad guys pay. And of course, the CIA and the Mossad take note of this gang of raggedy-taggedy young girls and boys, young women. So they go, well, maybe you can help us capture some of these. And so vigilante justice ensues. So it's a riot. It's fun. But the underlying themes, I don't go into detail on any of these, other than just the one time when that little Asha is told that she has to marry this man who's 450 years old, and just the sinking feeling in her stomach, and then she starts to plot her way out of it, and she does it in a light way. She sells cupcakes for a living. She stuffs the money into her pillowcase, and then she has enough money to buy a air ticket back to Tanzania, to Africa, where her parents lie buried. But unbeknownst to her, of course, it's a novel. The guy who's selling her the ticket actually is sending her somewhere else, and so the story goes. But these girls are plucky. So it's actually a story of a lot of, and I do try to inject a bit of humor and try to make it entertaining, because otherwise, like you're just what you said is very, very typical. I have lots of things that I worry about in my life. I just can't read something that'll drain me even further, entertain me. And that's a human need. And I think that's what I'm trying to hit first. But at the last page of every one of my novels, when you turn the page and you think it's over, I have very surreptitiously put a list of just a few words, like, do you know there are more slaves today than there were ever being transported from West Africa to the Americas during the 15th century, 16th centuries? There are more slaves today, and most of them happen to be young girls. Anyway, so I give a few statistics for people to go, and people read that and go, oh, I didn't realize there was some truth to this story. I thought, we just so I try to entertain and educate at the same time.
That sounds great. That sounds like the books sound like they're a lot of fun, and I think the approach is, it's probably a much better way to get a message across. than to be preachy and
Yes.
to write all the horrors of everything that's going that's going on.
Yes.
Yeah, that's cool. I'd like to shift gears a little bit though. Here.
Yes.
And I want to talk a bit about your career, because you talked about, well, you worked in the government. I met you originally when you were a project manager, I think for the Canadian government, and
Right.
here you are, sort of 8 to 10 years later, and you're a full-time author. So you probably I'd like to talk a little bit about how you made that transition, because you don't strike me as someone who is going to stay in, as a public servant for the rest of their lives. So, but it was, how did you manage that? Like, how did you go about managing, this transition to becoming a writer? It's hard to do. Not many people are able to do it. Or so many of us are actually stuck in jobs that we
Yes.
don't really like, but they satisfy us to an extent, and we don't really pursue our dreams really.
That's true. I actually have written 4 nonfiction books just about that.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome.
That's all my nonfiction books are. I say they're about. They take you on a journey from where you are today to where you dream you want to be. And in my nonfiction books, you will read a story, but that story is yours. So they showcase my journey, but instead of just rambling on because nobody wants to read about a memoir of this little known writer, I thought I'm going to give them the tools I used. And one of the big tools is figuring out that big question on what you want on your tombstone, right? That's the first marker, is figuring out, are you happy where you are today? And at your tombstone, is that what you want to be written? You've only got one little dash between your birth date and your death date. And that dash carries everything you've done in your life. What do you want that to be filled in? So that's the first question I ask myself. And like any other adult, you make change when crisis happens. And I had a series of crises happen at the same time. When I got back from Europe, back to Canada, it just happened all at the same time. That made me ask that question. Is this all what life is about? And where do I want to go next? I have another, 50, 60 years left of my life if I'm lucky. What does that look like? And then I did what I know best. Ben, we met when I was doing risk management. I manage risk management programs for the federal government, and I decided to risk manage my situation. And
right.
and I've jumped out of a plane. I don't know if you do extreme sports.
I do. Well, I do endurance sports, and some people say it's extreme. I don't think it is, but
Yeah.
but some people tell me that it is.
Well, I think it's the same concept. So when I don't skydive often. I've only done it once, but I've gone bungee jumping. I've done a whole bunch of other stuff where to get to that point when you're standing at the edge of that plane, and you've got to. And I didn't go with some tack to someone else, to an instructor. I just had to push myself off the plane. But to get to that exact point, I had to do a whole lot of research, homework, studies, preparation, and then take that huge leap. So, and because I have had that very physical and visceral experience of jumping out of a plane all by myself, I use the same concepts of jumping out of this very stable 6-figure salaried, golden handcuffed. I was going to get a 6-figure salaried pension, which was, I look back and go, wow, I was really set for life. But I was miserable in the job. It didn't suit me, and my job didn't, and I didn't suit my job. And it was becoming clear. So it was time for me to make that leap. But to do that, I started to write 2 books, which will go nowhere. They're still hidden in some file because they were terrible, but they were good examples, good ways for me to figure out, am I good at this? I joined all the authors associations I could. I went to writers groups. I took writing classes. I did whatever I could to learn about the business. I spent a lot of time when I wasn't working studying the publishing and writing industry, because there's an upheaval happening in the publishing industry, and I saw opportunities that I could like huge disrupting opportunities that I could take advantage of. And so I'm learning all this on my side while I know I need to get out. And then I decided I'm going to put a business plan. I joined, when I came to Vancouver, I joined a venture incubator, and I wasn't going to ask for money, but that's what they train everybody for. But I said, I don't need money because
it's, you get the advice.
Right. So, and also the writing, to write a book, you don't go and ask for $1 million of venture capital, right? But I went there and I said, help me get myself ready so when I do quit. And so I did a business plan with them, and I have an MBA that would help me, but I wanted them to give me the street smarts and tell me this is what would sell. And I did a financial plan. I hired a financial planner and I said, help me out here. So we together created a 3-year plan. This lady and I, she helped me. And I said, okay, 3 years is a really good runway for me to get out. And if nothing else, by the end of 3 years, if all I happen to do is to write a bunch of books and books that are burning in my belly, that's still an amazing opportunity. I still have 2 degrees and 15 years of enough experience on the world. I'm good.
You can go back and get a job if you need to, but if I need to,
right? And so packing that parachute before jumping off that, I still remember, Ben, just standing with my toes at the edge of that plane with the wind rushing by me and the instructor screaming next to me, and my toes are just, and you're holding on to that like some hook on the top of the plane, and you gotta let go, right? It was so hard, but it's so invigorating. So I did that, and I thought I can do that in my real life, if that makes sense.
That makes total sense. That makes total sense to me. And when I think about some of the people I've had on this show, one in particular, one conversation in particular was my first year with Kate Sukkel, and she wrote a book called The Art of Risk, and she interviewed and profiled in this book like people that do the special forces operators and people that jump out of planes who are people that jump out. They are people who jump. Those special forces operators do that, but also base jumpers and so on. And the way and to them, to all of those people and the other so many folks that I've spoken to on this program, that these sort of quote unquote extreme things, well, actually they risk manage the shit out of it, so that it doesn't actually feel extreme. They still have to do it, but you prepare, and you get to a point where, well, actually it doesn't feel like a huge risk because you've done all this research and you've prepared and so forth. But you have to obviously do that, and I think a lot of us are scared to even try.
Isn't it that you don't? You do risk management. You probably know about the topic more than I do, but you don't risk manage yourself out of the decision because you can go into analysis paralysis. And this is what happened in my former workplace, was we would go into analysis paralysis and we'd look at all the obstacles that would come our way, and then you take the easy way out, which I think is a big mistake because you lose out on all the opportunities. The smart thing to do is to prepare for them and know what the worst case scenario is, but you don't dwell with it. You know it, you figure it out, and then you put it aside. Your brain should then, like driving a car, right? If I look at the deer on the side of the road, my car might veer towards it, but instead I'm saying, oh my God, I'm driving to California, and that's my eyes are ahead of me, and I'm excited and I'm looking forward. I know there are obstacles. There might be a deer crossing the road. There might be people, who knows what's in the highway. So I think with that mindset, and I have to tell myself this every single day, keep your eyes, you're going to California or whatever, I'm going to be the next international best-selling author. That's where I'm going. Yes, this is happening, that is happening, but I don't care. I have a bad review today, or I have, there is something, Ben, I have to share with you, that when you decide what you want on your tombstone and you're so excited and you work really hard to get there, and if your whole energy is focused on that, there are things that kind of fall into place, and you wake up the next morning and go, did that really happen? Like, is that, like, that never happened to me before. It was always an uphill battle for the next promotion, because I hated that job, but I thought that was what I had to do. But now I'm just letting go and go, I love my work. Even if nothing happens, if all I do is write this one chapter, I'm having a ball, and there's some weird synchronicity. I can't say what it is, but it's a it's good.
Yeah, I hear you, and I think that the difference between that and, say, trying to go for another promotion is that you're trying, when you're going for that promotion, you're trying to please other people, and you're doing it. It's not coming necessarily from an authentic place. And when you have a sense of purpose, then, because I think a sense of purpose and values and a personal philosophy, it is a great, actually, risk management technique, because no matter what happens, what gets in your way, you kind of know what to do and where you're going. Like, it's a way of managing uncertainty. If you've got two choices, you just kind of line them up and say, well, which one most closely matches what I really want to do and what my purpose is. And then it becomes a no-brainer. Even if someone says, well, that one's paid more money and you can have a better pension or whatever, you can say, well, yeah, but I'm giving up this. And so the actual choice is this. So it's a way of cutting through the uncertainty. And I think that's the people that seem to do these great things. They have that sense of purpose as far as I can tell. And I haven't come across too many people that are kind of like, I don't have it. I don't have it, but I'm doing all these wonderful, doing really well. Or I'm doing exactly what I wanted. And it's a purpose, right? It's not a goal. Because the goal is very specific. Yeah, it's a sense of direction. You're not quite sure when you're going to get there, but it's that sort of saying I like, which is having again, coming back to another great guest I had, having a compass, not a map. That that sense of direction.
Love that.
I love that as well.
Yes.
There was Anna Glover, who's one of my guests. Having a compass, not a map, is so much more powerful. Which you have, you've developed, and so I think that's a great lesson for anyone who's trying to set themselves up to do something similar. Not obviously not the same thing that you're doing, because what you're doing is coming from a very unique place that only you can do, but it's coming from a very strong sense of purpose, which is wonderful.
Right.
I'm actually curious about how you also, so you said you risk manage your way in a sense. So how do you approach decisions as well? Like how do you, is there something that you do specifically around, if you have what you might call a big decision or something that you're trying to decide on? How do you make a big choice, a big decision?
Oh, I love that question. Have you heard that Jeff Bezos talk? I think he gave it at where did he give it? But anyway, Jeff Bezos said it best, and if I may quote him, he said that for life's big decisions like changing jobs, or for whether I want to become a baker tomorrow, or whether I want to, I don't know, join Elon Musk's, get on that rocket ship to Mars. That's a huge life-changing decision. He said, those you use your instincts, but for making sure that the business will be profitable in the next 6 to 12 months, or what kind of numbers are you looking at in the next quarter, how many books are you going to write, how many, what's my target market like, those decisions are made with my logical brain. So I've tried to, for the last 5 years, that's the tack that I have taken, and I've realized that in my former life, I only utilized my rational brain. I've just made decisions based on pure logic. My pure logic said you get your, I left home. As soon as we came to Canada, I just had to leave that environment. So I took a little, a ratty suitcase, and I got myself out, stood in the streets going, oh, I guess I have to find a bus stop, but I have no idea where I'm going to go. I have no family. I'm in a new country. I knew nobody.
How old were you at that time?
I was 19. So I was an adult, but I wanted to leave home as a child, and I tried a couple of times, but something inside me told me, and again, instincts, I guess, in a way, that you don't want to run away while you're in a mining town in Kalalushi, somewhere far away, that that's what happens to the girls in my books. Then you fall into bad hands. Some reason I didn't do that, but it was at 19. I was in a country where things were safe. I could call for help, but I just walked out and I went over to some university dorm rooms, and I think I slept in a couch, and then found a job cleaning toilets at one point, pay my way through. But why am I telling you this? It's going back to instincts versus guts, after that experience, every decision I made was very logically based. I got to get my first degree. All I know is from reading my books, I have to get go to school, get my degree, get a job, make sure I have enough to pay for my rent. Like, those are logical decisions, right? And it's mostly survival at that time. And then you get into that rut of, okay, well, now I have an amazing job with an amazing pension. Now I want to get that next promotion. All of that was very logical, rational thinking. I need my MBA now. Why did I make that decision? Did I enjoy my MBA? I had made a ton of good friends. I got to travel. But would I do it today? No. I did that because my brain said your next promotion, executive XYZ, needs to have a master's, and that's the best thing to have. And then when I shifted into the writer world, I started to realize that I need to make those huge life-changing decisions using my instincts. So the decision to leave the government and become my own boss, the decision to write the kind of books that I write and tell the stories that I tell, I use my guts. But I have annual goals. I have 6 months goals. This morning, I spent most of my morning sitting around trying to figure out what my next 6 months will be, what I will produce, who I will target. So very logical brain. So I use that Jeff Bezos, I guess, thesis in a way to... I love it. It's helped me, and so far, and I'm happier for it. And I find it's more productive. It because then you've got both of them balancing really well.
Yeah.
Your left and your right brain. I mean, your instincts and your logic.
Yeah, we need both, obviously, and I guess the bad decisions occur when you mix up the two, right?
Yes.
Yeah. You use logic to try and solve, deep existential questions, and you use instinct to try and figure out how to run a business, or how to do do marketing or something like that.
Yes,
that's a good lesson. That's I love that. That's great. What's your vision for the future of what you're doing? Where do you want it to go? Where do you see it going?
I have and I always say, you can laugh at me if you want, but
no
in
laughing.
The next 10 years, you're allowed to. In the next 10 years, what I really want to have on my tombstone is I love these microloans. I think it's Dr. Mohammed from Bangladesh. He started up with the idea, and then we have Muhammad Yunus, right? And they have Kiva and a whole bunch of small organizations, they're big now, who are doing some amazing work. But I think we need to reach more, and especially, and I hope this doesn't come across, this is not sexist, but in between your world and my world, Ben, this is not an issue, but in the developing world, especially in Asia and some parts of sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America, women do not have the same rights. And Middle East, not only do women not have the same rights, they gladly pronounce it and they legislate it. Look at Saudi Arabia. Yeah. So I think if there is a way, so there are many ways to fight the battle. You can go out in an all-out revolutionary war. You can also do it, play the like the girls in the rebel game, where they go out and they take out the bad villains from underneath for the CIA and the Mossad, or you could do it another way and try and find a way to reach out to those under the most marginalized people on earth and give them the resources, the help, the role models, and information to help them create better lives for them. And then they will be like Dr. Yunus did, right? He said, I'm only giving microloans in Bangladesh to the women because once the women gets the money, otherwise if the guy gets the money, he will go and this is not it's not. I mean, it's not true for all men, of course. But when there are certain cultural identities, that kind of activity happens. So, but the woman will go out and not only will she start a business, she will bring back to the community. So I want to build a platform where we can do this in a much larger scale. And I call it already the Rebel Diva platform, where we create rebel divas around the world. And they could be women from the brothels, like in my book. So the women who are trafficked, or the women, and teach them how they can be self-sufficient in their own right. It's because when you become self-sufficient, then the men turn around and they show some respect, right?
Yes.
In those countries. And that's something I saw growing up. And so I'm hoping if that's a way to solve this problem, I want to create the most massive global platform that is entrepreneurial based to help these women, because I'm not a big fan of creating more employees. I'm a fan of helping people stand in their own right, follow their passions, which is what my nonfiction books are all about. And so if I can help those young marginalized girls and women and boys as well. I mean, in the Middle East, if you are a gay man, you are in Iran, they execute you. I mean, I can't imagine. It's just reprehensible. Whoever those marginalized people are, to help them to be self-sufficient, regardless of their cultural, traditional backgrounds, and then they will stand up. And I think that's one way to change the world.
I also imagine even heterosexual men as well. Like, if you get married at the age of 16 or whatever, you have no life experience. What what are you? And all of a sudden, you've got this responsibility of taking care of a family, raising a family, and it's like you don't even know who you are.
Right.
And life expectancies are now in the 7. There's no reason why we shouldn't be all living to the age of 80 on average. And you think, well, gosh, that's this is still a child, right?
Yes, exactly. Isn't that shocking? And I think I also heard the statistic that when girls go to school and finish high school, secondary school, the rates of childbirth goes down. So right. I mean, we are 8 billion, getting to 8 billion. We don't need more humans. We're already hurting the planet as it is. And I think it's time to sit back and take care of our fellow humans by helping them create better lives. And don't tell me my culture doesn't allow this. You can tell me that, but I think that's just regressive when you say, no, my tradition means I put the woman in a veil and she's my fourth wife. Well, that doesn't certainly help us evolve as human beings and create a better place. It certainly will maintain your structure and your tradition and your power structure. And you know what's interesting about all these things we talk about, Ben? In my mind, I don't sexism, racism, any of this stuff. We can call it whatever they want, but they're power structures.
Yes.
And tomorrow, if Martians come and they're all green, and we might all get anti-green, right? It's a power structure. How dare you take away the resources I have. So it's just, that's all it is. It just comes in different formats.
And a lot of that's driven by fear as well.
Yes.
I think a lot of what's going on in the world, and including the Western world, is fear.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's so. This is great. This is what you're doing. I love it. It's fantastic, and I'm sure my listeners will. They'll love it as well. So, I'd love to continue chatting, but we probably do need to wrap it up.
Yes.
But actually, first of all, before we do start to wrap it up, was there anything that you wanted to mention and cover off that we didn't get a chance to?
Oh goodness, I think I've overstayed my welcome. And
No, you certainly haven't. You certainly haven't. But was there anything that you wanted to cover off that you didn't get a chance to?
No, I think we're good. I think I appreciate and thank you for having me and letting me speak out authentically and from the heart.
Pleasure. It's my absolute pleasure, Tikiri. I thoroughly enjoy this. Before we do go, where can people find you and follow you, and social media platforms, your website, all that good stuff?
I'm almost everywhere. I mean, all bookstores. I think about 50 bookstores around the world, online, offline. But if you want to find me, just go to TikiriHerath.com. That's my first name, last name.com, and you'll find everything you need there, including my fiction books and my nonfiction books. And and the Rebel Diva Academy, which is going to launch in January 2020, which is really exciting. A whole bunch of courses based on my nonfiction books. So it's all there.
Cool. This was awesome. Thank you so much. I thoroughly appreciate it and wish you all the best. And I'm sure you're doing so many things. I'm sure that when we 6 months down the road, I'd love to maybe have you back and we can chat about what you're working on then, because I'm sure it'll be fantastic. So thank you.
I'm honored. Thank you so much for having me, Ben. I appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure. Bye for now.
Okay, take care.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that. Links are in the show notes as usual, including a link to Tikiri's book Fearbuster, which is available to all of you for free. So do check all of that out. And before we go, I do get asked how you can support the All Things Risk podcast. And really one of the best and easiest ways to do that is to give us a positive rating or a review wherever you get your podcasts. It's also completely free to do that, as well as to share any episodes that you enjoyed on social media or via word of mouth. And if you have any suggestions about the show, drop me a line at allthingsrisk@gmail.com. And that's about it for now. We will be back very soon. In the interim, and as always, don't forget, risk is life.